Tom, thank you very much. I didn't prepare slides because I like to look at the audience and talk about how things are going on. It's a pleasure to be on the same program with Todd and Don. And what you'll hear from me as a recovering politician. You see, back in my younger days, I was a county commissioner. And we talked about Front Range Airport. That was my project as a county commissioner. We did a minor project called DIA. It was our efforts that allowed DIA to happen and go forth. And when you talk about the total impact of what DIA, it took an election to get it into Denver, but the impact that that has had on this Front Range and the state is one of those things that when we talk about the future, it's those kinds of things that makes us different than the rest of the world. This region is going to become what they call a mega region. And it'll go from Cheyenne to Albuquerque, and it'll go from Denver to Salt Lake City. We expect that the state of Colorado by 2100, 84 years, will have in it 18 million people. The region will be in the neighborhood of 30 million. For the state of Colorado, what that means for our future is everything that we have today, underline everything we have today, in the next 86 years has to be rebuilt 3 times in order to get enough facilities to house the population that we're going to have in 2100. And so we're just now starting that journey. I can relate back when I moved to Westminster in 1943, and it was in the 400 numbers of people. We lived on a 2-lane federal boulevard. And 9 years after I moved there, they opened this road. It was called the Denver Boulder Turnpike. Now we know it today as 36, Highway 36, but it was the Turnpike. It was a 4-lane road that in 5 days, 64 years ago, opened. January 25th, 1952. Population of Westminster at that point was less than 2,000. You've seen from Don's figure, in the 8 years between 52 and 1960, Westminster went from less than 2,000 to 13,000. Our water system at that point, as has been mentioned several times, our water system was wells. And when you're pumping things up 500 feet, you can only pump so fast. You've got to get water running downhill in order to give you enough water volume to handle the number of people. 4 elections later, Westminster had the decision to do its own water supply. It's called Stanley Lake. And we went from water going in the ground to water coming off of the mountain. And that allowed us that in the late 1960s, all that growth that Don showed you on that map happened because that was the first time that we annexed into Jefferson County. It was the first time that we annexed north. The first annexation north was where Digital Globe was, and that was the Western Electric plant. And it has had 30 or 40 names, maybe 50 names since then. But it was that first annexation. Now remember that when the city council did that annexation, they had water in Stanley Lake. And if you remember, that's at 88th and and Alkire this way, all right? It's a long ways that way, and 120th and Pecos. And there was no lines or roads or sewer plants or water treatment plants. All of those had to be put in place to make that annexation work. All right? Now, when we think about Westminster and its future, the Turnpike caused all of that to happen. It was a major investment in transportation. Now let me tell you where we're at today. In 2016, the Turnpike will have been rebuilt as Highway 36, 3 lanes in both directions, and that's what caused the growth, from 1952 on. So that's happened. But the other thing that's happening, and that's called fast tracks. Fast tracks is being engineered and coming into place. Adams County School District 50 has 4 stations in fast tracks. That school district will be reinvented in a way, if you look at it 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you won't recognize it from what it is today. We built a school that caused all kinds of controversy because it had 3,000 students for a high school. Today it's got about 2,900 of those, and we haven't seen any growth yet. The growth that will happen in the next 10 years, next 20 years, that school isn't anywhere close to being big enough. All right? Now, that's where we're at today. One of the things that we've done in the last 8 years is we only owned about 30% of Stanley Lake. The city went out in the last 8 years and bought enough water so we now own 50% of that water. That allows us to do what we're talking about, to grow this way, because that's where we have to go. We need to have the ability to grow so we have room for that growth that is going to take place. Don only said it was going to end at 2040. I just don't think that we're thinking far enough ahead if we limit our vision to 2040. We need to think about what it's going to be beyond that. I think Westminster has been moving in that direction to allow us to do those types of things. Developers have told us that if we do not have rail at our building points, the one thing you will not get is the corporate 500 companies coming out and moving their headquarters. You got to have rail. I'm surprised that Google went to Boulder because they don't have rail there yet. And RTD is saying that by 2045, they're going to have rail there. Well, I'm going to be 100 and... I told them I was going to come back and haunt them. See, I was on that board, the RTD board, our first meeting in 1999, in January 1999, we approved 3 minor things. T-Rex. If you've been around for a while, you know what T-Rex has been built, and they told us that would be enough expansion down there that those roads would never fill up. And they filled up the next year after it opened, and it's back to congestion as usual down there. But see, they have light rail that was 20 miles of light rail down there. And quick question. You got 10 lanes of interstate and 2 lanes of light rail. Which one will move the most people? By how much? 50%? No, it's a little bit more. You want me to answer that? Oh, that isn't me. Huh? All right. What it will do is the light rail using the current technology will move 8 times more people than those 10 lanes of interstate. And you have the opportunity to go beyond that if you change the technology. And so that technology can be changed. And that's why you need rail. And that's why the projects that are going right now to help the city get rail to the city center, the new downtown, and to the promenade, those are critical for that next growth that will take place. They'll give us 3 stations, and all of those are critical for what we're going to do. My forecast is by 2026 that rail will be in, and you'll see that kind of growth. You'll see the first corporate top 500 companies to announce their headquarters in Westminster by that time, because we'll have rail. That's how critical it's going to be to allow us to do that next growth. So rail is a critical part of making that happen. Now, I don't know, when you talk about what the Turnpike did for us and what a remodeled 36 is doing for us and Fast Tracks is doing for us, it might be that we'll be growing faster than the other communities. I can tell you, in setting with the local governments around, we're the only ones that's embraced that you got to go this way. None of the rest of them have done that yet. I think if you're going to be a part of what this future is, that 30% of our 38 square miles that is in parks and open space will stay there. But the rest of the area will be re-looked at. But there's prominently 6 areas in the city that you can have higher growth, and I think that will happen. So those are the future as I see it, because there's opportunities that we have. The other thing that we talked about earlier is, I'm a Presbyterian, so I can say this, all right? It's a good thing the Presbyterians aren't in charge anymore. Because when we do our new downtown, we'll be able to have liquor. Now, as a Presbyterian, I like, an adult beverage. And I think that that's part of what brings it together. But our now downtown will have cultural events in it. And as we look at what we're going to do in the future, we have to have a diversity for all of us. The 2 age groups that Todd talked about that look at transportation are those under 35 and those over 55. And because I was in Jefferson County, and I can relate to those figures because I'm the one that caused all that be flat on the other side, there's more and more of us who are seniors who make the decision that I've made, and that's that I don't want to go out of town to create a new lifestyle. What's the definition of hometown? It's when you can go to your corner grocery store and you know somebody. My corner grocery store is Costco. And I want you to know that virtually every time I walk into Costco, I know somebody, because that's hometown. And that's a critical part of what hometowns are going to be, because you need to go and to be and to know somebody and carry on conversations and talk to Heidi about having your hair done. Some of us need hairdos, but if you want insurance, there's another guy you go talk to. I got 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, well, see, that's what he does, is he cuts me off. I just wanted to thank Tom again, because Tom and the DaVinci Institute will make a tremendous difference in creating the types of things that we need to create for our future. Westminster is a great place to be from. It's a great place to be a part of. And when we grow up, whatever we grow up to in 2100, it'll be a great place to be. Thank you very much.
What I'd like to do is have Bob and Don and Todd come on up to the front, and let's Let's see if the audience has any questions here.
First of all, Colorado attracted 101,000 people last year. That's the statistics going out. But based on your estimate of 3 million people coming here in 16 years, additional people, that's 200,000 a year. And another statistic thrown out, and I don't know how valid it is, but it says Colorado's right now is short 24,000 dwellings, causing all the rents and how home prices to shoot. So how, with the anticipated growth, how do you get the dwellings built? Whether they're large, tall buildings, or whether they're standard suburban place on a half-acre lot. I mean, how do you get them done? And what is the situation with that?
Let me give a little bit more of a statistical background. 1900, we had 500,000. 2000, we had 4.5 million. Okay, and when you look at 4.5 million, 18 million, it's all in the same percentage of growth. I'm not going to tell how they're going to build them, but we've done it in the past. We'll do it again. So Don and Todd, you can talk about
So the
that.
good news is that the city council, I think our city council in Westminster was way ahead of everybody else in the region when they said 2 years ago, we've got to start thinking about affordable housing projects in Westminster. And that was at a time when people were saying, what are we building here? We're building some housing that's going to be just for people who don't have jobs? What is this? People didn't understand really what was being discussed at that point. What was being discussed is the growth in population was going to affect our housing in this market, that this was going to become a place that people who worked here couldn't live here, couldn't afford to live here. So what they've done in the last 6 months is we're working with some consultants and we're looking at a housing study. And that housing study is coming back right now, and it's encouraging us to make sure and build affordable housing into every development we do. Downtown Westminster development, right now I can tell you it's going to have about 600 or 700 units in the first round. Probably about 25% of those will be affordable. In South Westminster, we're awarded 2 projects this last year by Adams County Housing Authority, ACHA funding, a project on Federal Boulevard and a project on Sheridan, which are also going to be affordable housing projects. There's going to be gentrification in our city if we don't plan ahead for this. So, we're working on planning for that on a rental basis. Now, on the ownership basis, we need some help with the state legislature. Right now in Colorado, construction defects laws, which are much too complex to get into tonight, but laws that we have in our state right now are disincenting the construction of condominiums. Why is that important? Single-family homes and townhomes are very expensive to build, and it's a very expensive market to get into at an entry level. What people need who are renting these apartments that are maybe 800 or 1,200 square feet, 2 people living in them, is they need the ability to buy a 600 to 800 square foot condominium. And until we get the law changed, it won't be possible in this state.
All right, do we want to go on to the next question?
Yeah, I'd just like to tie on to this question. What is your opinion, or are you embracing through zoning and other methods the tiny house movement and container house movement to kind of solve some of these problems where someone can have a container house or a tiny house in their backyard and now they're a landlord and also housing? Is that a part of your philosophy?
I think we've talked about this. I think what it is about diversity of housing stock. What you're seeing is, and I think Don said it best, the construction defect issue has created really there's a gap in the housing market. So condos, ownership of these multifamily components, you don't see that development taking place right now. And it's been compounded because in an economic condition that we had back in 07, 08, as things kind of tapered off, credit, people lost their jobs, they may have had lose their house. As the economy comes up, and this always happens in an economic cycle, you see people they start getting jobs, but they may not have the credit to purchase a single family home. So they're looking for this condo where they can get in and they can kind of build back up. We don't have that stock, so you're seeing all these apartments and apartment complexes are being built, but there's far more demand than there is the availability. So what you're doing is we're pricing people out of the housing. I mean, rental prices are ridiculous, and that's where the housing authority, the county, the city has taken a concerted effort. We actually talked about this today about a project in Thornton off about 104th, but it's about having affordable housing, and we're not talking about projects. We're talking about the teacher, the police officer, the families that have something where when you talk about housing, you talk about usually if they're spending 30% or less of their disposable income or their income, that's probably a good area to be. But what we're seeing is people are spending 50, 60% of what they're taking home to pay for their home, to actually afford to live. That is a problem, and so that's what we're trying to deal with, and I think it's that diversity of housing stock that's going to be critical.
So let me follow up on his question. Is it legal to have a tiny house in Broomfield, or in Westminster, and put it in your backyard?
Zoning would make it very difficult to do that today.
Okay.
Our zoning laws, as a society, I'm going to ask you to think about something. As a society, we've got to start looking differently at what we believe to be acceptable neighbors. That's a reality. We just went through a situation here in Westminster where we had a very, very toughly debated apartment building development next to a very premium single-family home development. And I understand the concern that we have in these situations, but you have to ask ourselves, for the future, are we going to be satisfied? Are we going to be okay with more rental housing development in our city and more unique projects like tiny houses? Westminster is, I'm surprised somebody hadn't hit me right between the eyes with this one, because you're from the outside, you're bringing these ideas. I'm not bringing ideas, folks. I'm just trying to react to what's happening in society, and I'm telling you, the one thing I think we got to step back and think about a second is whether or not our $1 million, 3,000 square foot home on a golf course is the way this society is going to live in the future, or whether there has to be alternatives, and whether those alternatives are going to be okay to be where I can see it, or does it have to be 4 miles away? If we're going to come like this, and if we're going to have a diverse society here that accommodates all the people moving to Colorado, we got to have to take the blinders off a little bit and be okay with some change.
So just to let you know, I came back from Mumbai, India, and I got to drive by the world's most expensive house, which cost over $1 billion to build. It was 25 stories tall, and it was designed for 4 people. And so it's right across the street from a lot of slum areas there. So it's rather ironic. Question over here?
Yeah, so you can build an oasis here in this area, but we're surrounded by communities.
Yes.
We're surrounded by I-70 and I-25 that are becoming gridlock that's really impeding our quality of life, and yet we don't seem to have a lot of control over what goes on, particularly in that level of infrastructure. What can we do? I mean, it's getting harder and harder to get around, and if we urbanize, it's going to get even worse.
I'm going to debate that just in this way. We're assuming that the model for urbanization is going to be everybody getting into a car and driving into Denver to work, right? To me, one thing we ought to be thinking about is bringing jobs to our community. Why can't this be the place of origin? Why can't this be the place where the job is? Why does everybody have to get an I-25 and I-70 to go to work?
Yeah, and I guess I'm thinking I-70 to go play, because that's where the play, that's the playground is up in those areas. It has nothing to do with work.
Well, as the former Park and Recreation Director, why can't we stay here and play? I think we have the best views, and the best parks, and the best open space system, and the best recreation facilities anywhere in the Front Range. And we have a lot of people right now who are coming to our city that we're going to Washington Park, and we're going to City Park, and going to other venues in Denver, and they're coming into our city now because of changes in their policies and the way they're treating their parks in Denver. People are coming to our city. We are 15 minutes from downtown Denver. We are right at their doorstep. We are a destination in our city, I believe, right here.
Okay. Over by the camera?
So with the redevelopment of the Westminster area, are you saying then because of the defect laws, they would all be rentals? Because it sounds like there's going to be a lot of residential, but it would be condo, but then apartments because of the defect law? Or are they going to be purchased?
There will be a disproportionate number of apartment buildings built until that law is changed.
Now, do you see a lot of the apartments converting after the 7-year rule or whatever it is to
If they're
condo?
built in a manner that they can do that. I think that's a possibility. But, you know, our governor just last week said that he had on his agenda dealing with this construction defects law. And I think it's possible that something would, there are, what, Todd, 7 or 8 municipalities, I think, now that have passed their own local ordinances to, which probably isn't going to be anything that holds any water, but it is sending a message to the state that 7 large jurisdictions have passed these laws. By the way, we're probably going to pass something like that in Westminster, too.
Okay, other questions? Yes, sir? Go ahead.
I assume you've described the strategy of Westminster for dealing with the future.
Yes.
All these other suburbs in the Metroplex have to deal with the future. Do they have to use the same strategy, or are there other viable strategies?
I think there is character in each of the individual municipalities, specifically in Adams County, you know, and it's really about where they place an emphasis. And some of it is, you know, I'll use Thornton as an example, because I think, you know, if you really talked about someone in a community that was very, had a lot of forethought, specifically about their infrastructure and their water. They actually purchased water back in, I believe it was 88, is that about right, Bob? Up in, really just outside of Fort Collins. They purchased a lot of acreage of water. They're in a project right now, they're actually bringing water down from the Poudre, that's where the water is, the Poudre River, all the way back down to Thornton. They thought very strategically about it, and it's why that community has done a lot of growth, but is looking to be probably about 250,000 people on a full build-out. There is growth potential there. So they took a real concerted look in their jurisdictions about this infrastructure. And I think Westminster, you guys talk about water, we talk about roads. I think roads are really a critical thing. But yes,
These sound like tactics to me. Will the two cities look different after 40 years? Thornton and Westminster.
They look different for a couple different reasons, and I think there is, you know, Thornton, for example, very much a bedroom community. It's a lot of homes and these sort of things, and I think Don's right on the money here. We should be working where we're living, where we're playing. That is what we're trying to build, is these communities, and what we've seen is a huge migration. Everybody that lives here may go off and work some other place. What it does, it puts a huge strain on your transportation network. It takes what you're paying and those amenities, you're actually doing it somewhere else. And so what we want to do, and what we talk about in the unincorporated area, and we talk about this with the other cities, is how do you bring these jobs? How do you bring these quality jobs, good diversity, and it's just not rooftops. Retail, you know, you can go after the almighty sales tax and just go after retail. That is a revenue component. But if you don't have a good office mix and a good commercial mix, you don't have a good balance. And so I think that's part of this project. That Don, you can affirm this, is how do you have a balance of jobs and places people live, and they come back and there's entertainment. And so we're changing up, and I think it's changing how people think about communities. Communities are where you live, work, play, learn, and the nice thing about the TODs and the transit is you can go on those different types of transportation networks, different than just driving your car, and I think we're thinking differently about that than what we've done in the past.
But if all the cities have all of these things, then aren't they the same?
I think people place different emphasis on different things. I would say if I looked at Westminster, I think they're doing things very differently than what Northland's doing versus what Thornton's doing. You know, a long time it was kind of this competitive attitude, and I think we've said, we've kind of stepped back and said, where are we really strong at? Where do we see other places? And maybe those areas complement the things we're doing. It's not necessarily a competitive atmosphere as it maybe has been in the past. You see some of that change?
I think it's definitely moving, and I think it's interesting that when Todd and I, in separate presentations, talked about our top goals, we both had regionalization up there at the top. And what that means is that we're talking more about what we're doing and trying not to duplicate and replicate and waste taxpayer money through the inclusion of the same kinds of design and development in both of our communities. I actually learned a lot from Thornton when I moved here. Jack Etheridge has been ahead of a lot of the cities looking at job growth in his city, I think. So, no, I think there's going to be similarities, but I just speak for Westminster. We are attempting to be that third urban center. I don't know if there's going to be a fourth, a fifth, or a sixth or not, but there's two right now. We are trying to be that third urban center. So when people talk about the state of Colorado, there's 3 urban places, and we're embracing that. And not everybody's willing to do that. You know, some people say, "What? You know, I don't want those. I don't want the things about the bad things that come with being urban."
So we have time for maybe 2 last questions. Phil?
Is there any traction with that Schoenberg Farms development? Like there was supposed to be a community garden or talk of that. And,
Yeah, we're very close to a development deal with a group called the Local Foods Campus.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay. Yes?
Yeah, so I was just curious, when I think about Boulder, and I do a lot of business in Boulder, I see them as a thumbprint for startups and technology. So to me, when I think, why did Google choose them? Sure, Boulder's on the list, but that's why Google chose them. Do you have a vision for what the thumbprint of Westminster should be? Are you attracting a specific type of business, or have an idea about what you'd like to pull in?
We are emphasizing creative industries,
Creative industry.
and we are attempting to create a strategic plan for economic development that is very thoughtful about going after those kinds of groups. But you know, what I'm learning through this is that it isn't so much about what you're going to tell people you're going to do, it's about how you present yourself to the world.
Okay, so just a quick last question. With Amazon collecting sales tax now, what kind of impact will that have on the bottom line for a city like Westminster?
It's a whole nother discussion, but we are 65% reliant on sales tax revenue in our city. That is an unsustainable future.
Yeah.
We have got to spread our revenue sources to property tax. Westminster also has the lowest property tax rate in Colorado.
All right.
Tom, to answer your question, all of those everything you buy on the web, and it's increasing all the time, all of those are delivered by UPS or FedEx or a delivery. They don't pay sales tax to pay for those roads and the infrastructure it takes to maintain them. And that's one of the problems with what they're doing on Amazon. They're only collecting the state sales tax. They're not collecting the city sales tax. And it's the city that provides that infrastructure it's going to take to maintain that. And so there still has to be a solution to allow them to pay their share.
Yeah, very good. Let's give a big applause to our panelists.